Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our 30-minute webinar. My name is Jenny Hodges, and I'm a writer and editor at the Change Companies. For those who may not know, we provide evidence-based solutions for behavior change using interactive journaling. And today we're going to talk about recognizing relapse, and Scott Covert will share how to support your clients in recovery. Many of you will recognize Scott, who's the Vice President of Training at the Change Companies. You may have had the pleasure to attend one of his trainings over the past 14 years. He's offered more than 300 live trainings to providers in addiction treatment, mental health, probation and parole, impaired driving, youth intervention, and more. At the end of our presentation, we'll take about 15 minutes for Q&A with any of you who submitted questions during registration or would like to participate. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Scott.
All right, Jenny, thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everybody. Happy to be back with you today again, this time talking about relapse. And I thought it was an interesting topic, and it was one that people have submitted for future webinars. And so we thought we would do it, but I never had, I had no idea the challenge it was going to be to try to make it interesting for all the clinicians and probation officers and others that join us on these webinars. And, as a person involved in the recovery community, I see relapse on a regular basis, but it's often long after the person's completed their treatment, and they're usually off probation. And the trainings I do on interactive journaling really are, all about how can we help individuals use evidence-based practices to become engaged in long-term positive behavior change so they stay sober and crime-free while they're going through their program. But once they've completed that program, it's kind of like we're done. Our job is done, and we usually don't track those folks, and if they decide to go off and relapse, it's kind of on them. So I thought, well, let's see what we can think about or talk about along those lines. So first, it's probably good to define relapse. And there's a lot of definitions out there. I chose the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And ASAM. So their definition is a process in which an individual who has established abstinence or sobriety experiences recurrence of signs and symptoms of active addiction. And I thought the two important words in that definition were establish abstinence. So if you're avoiding certain behaviors for extrinsic reasons, like I don't want to go to jail, or I don't want my supervision extended, or I don't want to get kicked out of drug court, and then you violate your conditions, or you have a positive urine analysis, that's not necessarily a relapse because you really weren't ever in recovery. You have to be, it's my thought and the thought of other people I've read that you have to be in recovery to relapse. And that's kind of what that definition points to. So if we relapse and when we're not in recovery, that's really just continued use. They're just doing what they do, And so, the fact is that relapsing or taking a step back or recycling or lapse, there's lots of different words we could use, is really quite common. And so if we think in other terms, if we think of behavior other than substance using disorders or criminal activity, something like type 1 diabetes, that's another treatable chronic disease, just like substance using disorders. The difference is when someone with type 1 diabetes maybe goes out to dinner and forgets their insulin pen, or they maybe abuse their insulin, like they know they're going to go out drinking for the night, so they try to adjust their insulin intake to compensate for the alcohol that they're going to be drinking. They stop checking their blood sugar on a regular basis. Whatever it is, we don't usually say that's a relapse. That's just an episode, part of their disease, and we treat that. We try to get them back on their treatment plan, or we adjust their treatment plan to better match what's going on in their lives. And so, really, we should think of substance use or other, behaviors that we look at day in and day out more in that light. And because we know from the trans-theoretical model that you're looking at now, Prochaska, Norcross, and DiClemente, that change is one step forward, two steps back. And relapse, or what Prochaska and DiClemente at least would call recycling, is common, and you can recycle out of any of the stages of change. So, words count, and we've been, talking about that for the last couple of years. And so using terms like recycling or lapsing might be less stigmatizing because, it can be demoralizing. Anyone who's tried to quit nicotine, I spent 30 years trying to quit nicotine. So I'm very, very familiar with this model. The cycle of wanting to quit, planning to quit, telling everybody you're going to quit, quitting, and then the crushing defeat of giving into cravings and relapsing only to start the cycle all over again. It's not only demoralizing, you feel a lot of guilt, you feel a lot of shame about that. And so I'll continue to use the word relapse. It's what the webinar, it's the title in the webinar, but maybe we should start thinking about using different terms. As with all our webinars, the focus today will be on the practical nuts and bolts, of relapse, and some useful tips. I hope they'll be useful that you can use in your work. And but if you're looking to go deeper into this, I would strongly recommend check out Terry Gorski, who's still actively working up in Chicago. Has done a lot of work on relapse prevention, and or Alan Marlott, University of Washington, who's deceased but did a lot of work on relapse prevention. So those are a couple of good resources for you to look into if you want to learn other information. All right, so how do we recognize relapse and better support our clients? And we'll go through a couple of key challenges with some basic strategies that are effective and discuss a few maybe nuances or things that the pros in the audience will appreciate. We always try to think of, something for people that have been doing this for a long time that might be helpful. And speaking of pros, as always, we're always interested in ideas that you have. Maybe you got a favorite technique or a thought you'd like to share. And feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll collect those and maybe have a chance to talk about them at the end of the seminar, which is 30 minutes. We do these in 30 minutes because you're all very busy, and we try to pack a lot in, and I've got a lot in, so I'm going to stick to the script and not have big old conversations because I run out of time quick. So if it looks like I'm reading, I probably am, because if my ADD kicks in, I'm going to take a lot of side conversations or side journeys, and we'll be out of time in no time. So challenge number one: how do we know someone is in recovery? This seems like a pretty straightforward question with a straightforward answer. If a person was drinking and drugging to the degree that it was having adverse effects on their lives, and then they stopped drinking and drugging, they must be in recovery, right? But again, what if they are abstinent strictly for extrinsic, external reasons? Like they don't want their spouse leaving them, or they don't want to lose their job, or more often because it's a condition of their probation and they don't want any more trouble. If someone is in action physically, but they're in pre-contemplation or contemplation mentally, they are not in recovery. They're really doing time, right? They're kind of waiting you out and they're doing their best to, fulfill your wishes so they don't have any problems. So what can we do to recognize if someone's in recovery? That's the first thing I wanted to talk about. So strategy number one is check frequency, duration, and intensity of behaviors, right? So let's say a person coming into probation identifies as being a daily drinker. That would be frequency. Drinks all day long, that's duration. Is unemployed, estranged from their family, has health issues, and now is in legal trouble, that would be intensity. But with all that going on, they can't seem to quit. They don't even think they've got a problem. But 1 month into probation and treatment, this person has 0 positive urine analysis, right? So no dirty UAs. And they're working on getting their liver enzymes down, their blood pressure's under control. Everything's looking really good, you know. But again, is this person in recovery? How would we know? So here's your first pro tip. We want to ask questions to identify if the adaptive behavior is increasing while their maladaptive behavior is decreasing, right? And so a simple question to ask would be, so how was your weekend? What'd you do over the weekend? And if their answer was, well, on Friday night, I was at an AA speaker meeting. And then on Saturday, I took the family to the zoo. And on Sunday, I volunteered at our church food pantry. It would be pretty safe to say this person is in recovery. They're living a recovery lifestyle. But if the response was, oh, fortunately, I was able to get away from my loser family and played golf all day Saturday, and then I watched the game on Sunday at my favorite sports bar with my old buddies, you may start to question if this person is in recovery or simply being compliant, right? And so, just when people are romancing the old thoughts, visiting, old friends, old places, especially in early recovery, it's dangerous, So ask questions to see if they're working their program. Are they taking responsibility for their thoughts and actions? Are they working the cog model? Which is key. I mean, that's so key in early sobriety, just always paying attention to what's going on in our thinker, because it is a chronic disease, and we have to be forever vigilant, at the messaging that we're telling ourselves during the day, and be responsible for managing our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, right? Working that cog model. All right, strategy number 2, reassess the stages of change. So there's a source at the bottom, and I believe this is on the handout. So Jenny will tell you about that handout at the end. Maybe you've already downloaded it. But if you go to the University of Rhode Island, or the source link that's on the slide at the bottom, you can find the Eureka. And I think, Prochaska and of course others there were heavily involved in the development of the Eureka. And it's just a series of questions you can ask people and identify what stage of change they're in. So you'll know if the person's pre-contemplative and or contemplative. And if you're an individual that works the trans-theoretical model, there's 6 processes available with many, many strategies for each of those processes to help people move from pre-contemplation to contemplation, and then contemplation to preparation, and then contemplation. Then any of you with motivational interviewing skills, you know that you can use ask darn questions, desirability, reasons, and needs. So there's lots of tools to help people have their thinking catch up with their action, right? So it's good, if you're using extrinsic motivation to stay sober and avoid friends that might lead you to do things that will get you into more trouble. That's good because you're sampling sobriety. You're sampling a pro-social lifestyle. The problem is people don't make that connection. And so it's good to help, teach people that model, teach people the stages of change, because it's the process that we all use to make changes, So teach a person to fish and they can start helping themselves with their recovery and their change. All right. So next challenge, helping the individual prevent relapse. Well, that would be good if we can do that. Can we help prevent relapse? So most relapses occur long before the individual picks up a drink or uses a drug, right? And individuals experience euphoric recall. They have those using thoughts. They, again, romance the thought. They play it through. They play it through different situations. And they do that multiple times before they finally give themselves permission to use, or they'll use a situation, something bad happened in their life. They got fired from their job. Um, you know, they got an illness, so, but how do we know? How do we know that's happening? How do we see or hear that someone's starting to go off the rails, and what can we do about it? Okay, so strategy number one, look for changes in habits and procedures. So if you're actively participating in your recovery, like going to family therapy, or you have a sponsor, or you're secretarying a 12-step meeting, have a job, you're making your restitution, you're spending quality time with the kids, and then things start to go in reverse, like you start disparaging your family, you drop your sponsor, you stop going to meetings because you don't need them anymore. You quit your job, that wasn't the right job for you. You're probably well on your way to the moment that will lead you back into treatment and having your supervision extended. Right? So, and since probation typically has individuals for an extended period of time, officers, you have the best shot at noticing behavior change, both positive and negative. But treatment too, if it's drug court, a lot of those drug court programs are 18 months, and you have cross-functional teams, and I'll talk about this a few times. This will be my underlying plea to all of you to really develop your cross-functional teams any chance that you can and work together. You'll be seeing and hearing those changes, and then it's time to revisit your case plan and your treatment plan. That's the time to call one another and say, hey, are you seeing this? Are you hearing this? Or what are you seeing? And then more important, what can we do about it? So how can we work together, and combine our resources to make changes to the plan that will be helpful to the individual? The pro tip is, to role play or rehearse and demonstrate those behavior choices. So in addition to negative self-talk, changes both positive and negative in our daily routines are common causes of relapse. So you finally land the job you wanted, and your first thought is, wow, time to celebrate, right? And then your next thought is, I'm not qualified for this job. They're going to realize I'm an imposter, and then the fear sets in, and so it's another good time to drink, and because you don't have the skills, you don't have the coping skills to manage, the day in, day out situations that come your way. So you can help individuals by role playing or rehearsing these situations and practicing the coping skills they have so they can choose the behavior they want. And that, really, that's the best we can do. So the more tools the person has, the more opportunities they have to be successful. in any of these high-risk situations, high-risk feelings that they're experiencing. But if we don't practice, if they don't try them on and get feedback, some people would call that social learning, um, they're most likely to rely on their old behaviors when things get tough. And it's those behaviors that really brought them to where they are. So, do your best to help the individual help themselves. All right, strategy 2, encourage the development of a recovery safety net. That says net or network. I guess it's a safety net, right? So if you're up on the balance beam, up on the tightrope, trying to keep things together, it's easy to slip and fall, right? And we know that relapse or recycling, it's a normal part of the process. And so who's going to catch you? And the more people individuals invite to play an active role in the recovery, the better shot they have at long-term sobriety. So this is why, any of you that have been to my trainings or have been on these webinars previously, as I mentioned earlier, I'm in long-term recovery and I'm a 12-stepper, but it's that fellowship that keeps me on the beam, right? And just having people, going to a meeting faithfully every week, having a home group, when you go there and share what's going on in your life, they hear it and they'll know if you're starting to slip. And they'll surround you, right? And try to get you back on track as best they can. It's why many sponsors make sure that their sponsees call them every day. And why? Why in that check-in? What are you, my probation officer? No. What we're listening for is your emotional sobriety. And if we hear you're restless, irritable, and discontent, we know that you're, going in the wrong direction, that the possibility of relapse is there, and we respond accordingly. So maybe we help you play the situation through, play it all the way through. Or we'll, pick you up and take you to a meeting. And so we can talk about it some more. But in any case, the stronger the person's safety net, the more they're surrounded by a herd of individuals that want to support their recovery, the better shot they have. And so a pro tip on that is to employ motivation and place value on social and emotional relationships. So what if clients don't want to go to AA or NA? That's pretty common. What is the support group dynamics and how can they build their support network outside of these organizations, right? So it's, what if their family is high risk people and their work is a high risk place? These are, it's tough to stay sober. So this is a time to employ extrinsic motivation. So sometimes some motivational interviewing trainers, some mint trainers may disagree with me when I say this, but again, I think of these cross-functional teams. And so, is this an opportunity where probation can help us? Can the courts or probation compel the individual to attend 2 or 3 meetings a week, AA or NA or Celebrate Recovery or Smart Recovery, to get their court card signed? And so the key is to help the individual recognize the importance of building a support network and not just complying with conditions, right? And, nobody thinks they need the help. Nobody wants to ask for help, and that's part of the shame and guilt and, the ego's kicking in. But really try to encourage them to actively participate in meetings, listen to others' recovery, identify changes they want, things that they would want out of life. And make sure to place value on emotional and social connections and, the importance of these relationships in supporting their long-term recovery. I think it's, one of the great preventers of people relapsing. We're social animals. And if you're just home isolating, white knuckling it, you may be beating your UA, right? You may be, coming up, you know, negative on your urine analysis. You can report that you're fine to your counselor and to your probation officer, but things aren't fine. And, and, you know, it's, it just makes it harder and a better chance that you're going to relapse at some point. So, okay. Strategy number 3, increase naturally occurring dopamine. Right? So, people do drugs for a reason. People drink for a reason, right? We're hedonistic. We seek pleasure. We avoid pain. So there was reasons why we used substances in the first place. The problem is we continued to use them until they didn't work anymore, and then we didn't stop using them, and then all sorts of problems occurred. So, in early recovery, when your brain starts to heal, a lot of individuals experience what some people call a pink cloud, or some people even think of it as a spiritual awakening. It's kind of a sense of euphoria and, just being high on life. But for most, that feeling, eventually it goes away. And some people experience low-grade depression or just simply feeling like life is boring, it's unsatisfying. If you're on medication-assisted therapy, I don't feel anything, I don't like this. So what are some things people can do to increase naturally occurring dopamine, without some kind of chemical enhancement? And so for the adrenaline junkies, try skydiving or, go test drive a race car at some professional driving course. Or I know a few individuals have gone out and gotten their pilot licenses and like to fly around. And those might be pricey options, pricey experiences. However, they do require you to be sober to participate. Uh, Working out is a great stress reducer and can enhance feelings of well-being. The healthier we are, the less likely we are to self-medicate and to relapse. Be a service to others. That's one of my favorites. There's never been a better time to give back, really, than there is right now. There's always service work available in AA or NA, or just, around your area. Try volunteering at the hospital or a nursing home, just sitting and talking with others, helping out. Volunteer at your local food bank or a soup kitchen. It's really good. I can't recommend it enough. Or get a hobby, gardening, maybe cycling. Maybe you like to join. And there's sober cycle groups. I mean, there's lots of places you can go. A lot of people think life is over when they quit drinking. It's not. It's really just beginning. They just don't know it because they haven't experienced it, right? And so, get people involved, and that's going to be really helpful. All right. See, even though I'm reading most of this, I'm still running long. Okay. Well, we still got good ones to give you. All right. So develop a workable relapse prevention plan. Strategy number 4. You think it's automatic, but it's often overlooked. Especially, there's not a lot of money for people going through recovery. Recovery times are shorter. You just don't get 28 days in residential settings anymore. So a lot of people don't get a chance to put together a relapse prevention plan before they leave treatment. A lot of times they don't put one together while they're under probation, but the old adage, fail to plan, plan to fail. So strongly encourage you, and that will be the pro tip, is help people develop a workable recovery plan and give feedback prior to completing their treatment. And the feedback is really important. So you can do that in a group setting, get feedback from your fellow group members. It's a great way to bring closure to group too. If somebody's leaving group, you're running open group and it's time for someone to leave, you know, you need some closure on that because people usually get a pretty intense experience out of group. So let them share and get feedback on their recovery plan, on their relapse prevention plan before they leave group. And certainly encourage them to share that with the officers. So, you know, officers ask, does the person have a, you know, they're in treatment? Are they doing a relapse prevention plan, or are they putting together some recovery plan? And ask them to share that with you. And then you can help them be accountable, right? Help them work their plan. And remember, these plans are dynamic. So again, you're a team. You're a change team. And so as you monitor the person, as they're doing their best to implement their plan, plus meet all their other conditions, you might have to change that plan. You might want to call the counselor and say, this is going on. Do you have any ideas on what we can do? So that, you know, our first thought isn't punishment, right? Like, oh, you got a dirty UA. You know, we need to give you a timeout. We need to extend your probation. We, you know, hit you with the consequences. If the person's truly in recovery and doing their best, it's better if we work together to try to figure out what we can do to get them back on track and back adhering to their program. So again, I really, really want to promote this you know, working together as these cross-functional change teams, especially in drug court, because if you know, for those 18-month programs where you're together, if you're really monitoring the individual, you're working together to keep the person on track, you're providing them with the resources and the support to keep going, you have all the information you need when you get together for staffing meetings. And that's really the information judges are looking for. So officers, you're still going to have your criminogenic plan, you know, and counselors, you're still going to have your biopsychosocial, you know, ASAM dimensions plan, and that's good. But they're the same plan. You know, if an officer tells the person non-association, you need to develop pro-social peers and stay away from your gang buddies, the counselor's talking about the same thing, but they're talking about it in terms of recovery environment, you know, and avoiding high-risk people, places, and things, right? So we're all working on the same things, but using different terminology, and the person doesn't get that, right? And if you can collaborate with the individual so they understand exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it and why it's important, you've greatly narrowed the path the individual is on. And you'll know, everyone will know if the person is on the path or off the path. And when they're off the path, what do we need to do to get them back on the path? So if you take away anything from today, please, this is it. I know maybe it's not directly to, you know, relapse, but in reality it is, because the more client-centered and outcome-informed you are, the better outcomes you're going to have. All right, so keeping the individual on track. I'll speed this up a little bit. The first strategy is do a decisional balance. So let's say the person has slipped. Why would we do this decisional balance? Some people call it a four-square decisional balance because there's four components to it. But we're really still looking at the con side of change and the pro side of change, or ambivalence. And if you remember ambivalence, that's from from the stages of change, when we're in contemplation, when we have reasons for change and the reasons for staying, in our current behavior. Or in this case, we're relapsing into old behavior. You only want to use the 4 square when it's somebody who's been in recovery, been trying hard, and then has slipped. And so what they're going to look at is the benefits of use, so the benefits of going back to using versus the consequences of going back to using. So the benefits, it takes away, it makes my life easier. It smooths out the day, takes away all my fear. I feel better versus the consequences. I just got another, 8 months of probation, or I'm going to get kicked out of drug court. And then we look at the consequences of non-use. What would that be? Well, I'll be unhappy. Life's no fun. I'm sad. Right? I'm living in fear. Versus the benefits of non-use. I am successful in probation. I have a happy family. I have a great job. I can look at myself in the mirror, right? That's what we would want people to look at. And so they can remember how bad it was, and they can remember how good it was getting. And sometimes that's enough to get people back on track. You don't want to do the 4 square with people who aren't in recovery, who are still truly pre-contemplative and contemplative. And the reason is because if you look at all aspects of your life, at best, they're going to come out equal, and you still won't change. You still won't move towards sobriety or changing your criminal lifestyle, right? So when people are in pre-contemplation or contemplation, you really want to use just the pro side of ambivalence when people are looking at pros and cons. In other words, you want them to focus in on the consequences of continued use and the benefits of non-use. Okay, hopefully that made sense, but it's important. And you can also reflect on lessons learned, right? Just because you relapse doesn't mean you lose everything that you gained while you were sober, right? It doesn't mean it all disappeared. So everything you learned and enjoyed while abstinence, it's still there and available for you. You need to get back on, the abstinence wagon, and get back to using all the new skills and changes that you were working on before to get back to where you were, right? And so besides doing that decisional balancing, have people do some expressive writing or journaling about the benefits that they were experiencing. What are their desires? What are their abilities? What were their reasons for wanting to change, right? And get them future focused and back into action. And the pro tip on this one is reflect on lessons learned about the individual, right? So counselors and officers, again, what were your lessons learned about the individual? What did you see that were the positives? Not just focus in on the negatives, but how do we affirm and validate the individual and get them back on track? It's another opportunity for you to collaborate with one another and have an empathetic viewpoint, right? What is the person relapsing experiencing or expects to experience? It's easy to think of a person unable to change or they have poor judgment. That's usually where we go, just because of the ramifications of relapsing from a substance using disorder or relapsing back into criminal lifestyle. But the fact is we're all the same, right? We all change the same. And so I'm not going to do this exercise. I've already gone past my time. Sorry. And but a workshop that I do, I ask these 2 questions. what do you think are 3 reasons you believe clients choose not to change? And then I ask, what are some of the reasons you may not follow through on changes you want? And so I'll just jump to the end. These are the responses I've heard over the years. For high-risk clients, they need an expert intervention. They'll never figure it out on their own. And they really need to be under supervision. When they're under supervision, they're doing well. And they just have resistant personalities. They don't want to change. But when it's us, it's like, well, I need more time, or it'll happen eventually, or I'll work on that after this big project is behind me, or it's really not that important that I make these changes. And that's probably truer to what's going on with your clients than those negative thoughts. So just keep that in mind. So strategy number 3, review and update a list of high-risk people, places, and things, right? Because, it's easy to relax when you get some recovery under you and you're feeling good and things are going your way. It's easy to relax that avoidance of high-risk people, places, and things. We think we got it covered and we can just go back and handle any situation and all things are good. And then we find out that it's not. And so people need to review that and be honest about it and have a plan. What's your plan for coping with these high-risk situations, high-risk people, places, and things, high-risk feelings? And I started this thing off with saying that, in recovery, we see people relapse oftentimes years after they've been sober. And it's the more complacent we get, the more we kind of rest on our laurels. We take our recovery for granted, and that's when it gets you. That's the setup for relapse. And so, just another good reason for that support network and for being forever vigilant on paying attention to what's going on in our heads and taking responsibility for that. And, we're not responsible for that first thought. Euphoric recall can kick in. I mean, we could just be watching a commercial during the football game and it's some new alcoholic beverage. And without even really paying attention to it, our mind's saying, oh, that's interesting. That sounds pretty good. I wonder what that tastes like. They didn't have like that. They didn't have that when I was drinking. That's it. That's the insidious part of the disease, right? The only disease that will tell you you're not sick. And if you follow that through, things just get rough. All right. Good. So relapse. It's different for every individual, but the more we can recognize the signs, the more we can prepare people, the more we can help people build their support network, the more we're actively involved, asking them questions, talking to them, asking them about what's going on in their lives, and then working together, the better shot we've got at helping people maintain long-term sobriety. All right, so only 15 minutes late, if my clock is right. So sorry about that. Here's that handout that you can download. That'll give you the highlights of today's conversation. I also want to put in a little pitch for getting back on track. This is a brand new journal that we have. And it was written by Dr. William Miller of motivational interviewing fame and Dr. Alyssa Forstheims, who is our president here at the Change Companies and is a Mint trainer and was a graduate student of Dr. Miller. And they wrote this wonderful journal, Getting Back on Track, for people that do slip. And so I would definitely recommend that you have that. And if you don't have time for people to do a relapse prevention plan, you don't have other resources, just give them that journal before they leave. Maybe do a little work with them on the first couple of pages to get them started. But if they're really interested in being successful, the more resources they have like that journal, the better shot they got. All right. So What do we need to do for, there you are. Hi.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Scott.
I was bad, Jenny. I went 15 minutes late. I
We'll
can't
go
do
ahead
30
and
minutes.
discuss some questions for anyone who's able to stay a few more minutes.
Absolutely. Go for it.
One thing, Scott, several people wrote in asking you to share more about is working through the shame and guilt that people often feel when they take a step back.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's true, right? Um, I would say start by normalizing the process. Again, you know, we think as relapse is bad. We talk about it as bad. Everybody, reacts to it like it's really bad, but we got to remember it's part of the change process, right? That trans theoretical model. So, recycling is part of it. Um, but you go to meetings and you hear people say relapse. Relapse is not part of recovery, but it is. Most of the time, it is. And remember that guilt and shame lives in the past, right? So that's what happens. We relapse and then we dwell on it. And there's your guilt and your shame and the people I let down and all of that. And you might have to go through that a little bit, maybe like a grieving kind of a thing. But boy, you really want to get people more future focused again and get them thinking about, what were your dreams? What are your dreams? What are your desires? What do you want? What are your abilities? What are your strengths and resources? All the things that you were doing that were successful. And always remember hope. And hope fuels the change process. Demoralized people don't change. So try to get them out of that funk as quick as you can.
On the other side of that, several people wrote in that they are seeing people who are overconfident or on the fence about participating in ongoing support. What are some strategies that might help there?
Well, first I would validate, or affirm their confidence. It's great. There's some intrinsic motivation there. And our whole goal really is helping people increase their intrinsic motivation. The problem is that we know they're overconfident. And so see if you can't talk them into spending a little bit more time to get all the tools that we know would be helpful for them to truly be successful. And that the more tools they have, the better. So ask them if they're willing to invest their time learning and practicing the very things that will help them, not just in being abstinent, but really in improving all aspects of their life. Because that's really what we're selling. That's the whole deal, right? Is that you live a happy, joyful, healthy life. That's the goal. And so you could try that.
Scott, you talked about coming up with a relapse prevention plan. Several people would like to know what resources might they look to help someone structure that?
Oh, good. Well, I do work for the change companies, and we're publishers of interactive journaling and evidence-based practice. And we've got lots of recovery type journals that would be helpful. We've got 12-step relapse prevention journals. We got cognitive behavioral recovery maintenance journals. We've got life skills journals. So there's lots of them. But um, earlier I mentioned, so go ahead and Google Alan Marlatt, Marlatt, or Terry Gorski, Gorski, and you'll find all sorts of good ideas on recovery and recovery maintenance. Okay.
Thanks, Scott. Several of our guests are helping people who don't have an opportunity to change their environment, either because they're minors, they are incarcerated. How can people stay on track with recovery when they are limited in making those changes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, it's difficult. And, I've had hundreds of juvenile probation officers over the years, say that's the fact, right? You get the youth, they do so well in these programs, and then they go home and things they get undone almost overnight. Again, cross-functional teams, work together. What resources do you have? If it's someone coming out of prison, is there sober living opportunities? Is there, transitional housing that's available for those individuals? Is there mentoring programs, people with lived experiences? Usually we can find those in the faith-based communities. For the youth, is there other family members, maybe grandparents or aunts and uncles somewhere more pro-social where they can live and work on their recovery? And if none of that's possible, or can we get the parents in the treatment? Can we get, is there family therapy where we can get the family? Because a lot of parents never learned parental skills, and a lot of parents are dealing with substance using disorders, and can we get them help? They heal as a family. But if all else fails, I mean, at least have that conversation and offer them the opportunity to learn some coping skills. That might be helpful. So just thinking about it, there's books on it. I think the one book is called Sober, and it's Dr. Robert Myers, who was a colleague of Dr. William Miller down at the University of New Mexico. And it's CRAFT, Community Reinforcement and Family Training, CRAFT. And so that might be another good resource to help people that are living in situations that aren't conducive to behavior change.
Great. We can go ahead and take one more question, Scott. Carla and Michael from Georgia wrote and asked if you could recommend any substance abuse or relapse prevention curricula for teens.
For teens, yes. They're a fun group. I love adolescents. They're fun. And unfortunately, their prefrontal cortex isn't completely developed, and they're bulletproof, and they're experimental in nature, But yes, again, plug for interactive journaling. We have the Keep It Direct and Simple. That's our adolescent treatment series. There's 12-step and cognitive behavioral journals. There's Forward Thinking for Probation. That's a great program. There's the new journal, What About Marijuana? And William Miller was one of the authors of that journal. Alternatives is a great journal. That's a great harm reduction journal. So we didn't talk at all about harm reduction because, relapse doesn't really go along with harm reduction. But, and the ultimate harm reduction is abstinence. But alternatives is a great kind of harm reduction journal. We got Helping Children Thrive is another great one. So lots of journals for youth. And but I'm sure if you Googled it, there's other programs out there as well. But we could definitely help with that.
Thank you, Scott. We'll end our time for today. If you'd like to refer to any of the points Scott shared, you can download a handout in your control panel. That's probably on the right-hand side of your screen right now. We'll also email this out with a link to the video recording, so you can refer to either at a later time. When you close the webinar, you'll also have an opportunity to answer a few questions about topics you'd like to hear about in the future, and we really appreciate your input. So thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.